It felt like the breaking point. This time the collapse of our marriage wasn't some vague shared failure. It was her doing. She looked as if she wanted to interrupt, to offer a word. But I didn't give her the space. I told her I was filing for divorce and said the casualness of her betrayal made me suspect it wasn't a one-off. She tried to interject denials, but I ignored them. I told her she could get another dog when she was single, even if it ruined her financially, and watched her grow defensive as I pushed the issue. She muttered that she tried to delete the video after sending it but had missed the removal window, and I shot back that, instead of trying to erase her act, she could simply have chosen not to do it. I could feel her temper rise, so I eased off. There was no point in fanning flames when, in my head, it was over. I told her I planned to move out. I didn't want to keep the place, and I left the rent to her after I left because I knew she'd struggle without a full paycheck. She began begging me to reconsider, but I read that panic for what it was. Someone suddenly realizing the financial hole she'd dug herself into while only working part-time. I packed what I could, called for a pickup, loaded my things, and left. Now I'm hunting for a cheaper place, one I can afford on my own. I found a low-cost divorce attorney, had Diana served, and hoped we could divide what little we had without drama. We weren't wealthy, so there wasn't much to fight over. The idea that she retaliated for me rehoming a dog by cheating and sending a video is beyond reason. Anyone who escalates a pet disagreement to that level has already checked out of reality. Leaving was the only sane choice. Months later, the divorce was finalized. There wasn't much to split beyond furniture and small items, so I focused on the things I wanted, and she didn't complicate the settlement. I don't have to pay alimony even though she asked for it at first, which was a relief. She chose to keep the apartment, a risky move given her finances, and the settlement left each of us with our share. Her car and personal items, my tools and savings, and that was that. Ending a short marriage at a young age stung. It felt foolish and hurtful to have lost the relative stability we once had. In a petty moment I craved a small measure of payback, so I mirrored her betrayal. I went to the store where she had worked, played it cool, and flirted with a woman Diana had always said she disliked. Within a week I'd been to that woman's apartment. We hooked up, and I asked if she'd let me make a recording from behind. I explained my motive and she agreed, partly because she harbored her own grudge. I sent that clip to Diana as soon as I got home, and even though it only showed a silhouette, she recognized the tattoo at the nape of the woman's neck and lost her composure. She had no idea where I lived, so all she could do was rage from a distance. I told her it was a little taste of what she'd given me, pointed out that we were divorced so I wasn't betraying anyone, and let her fury simmer. She called, accused me of immaturity and pettiness, and I listened until I could stand it no longer, then hung up and blocked her everywhere because I didn't want to receive another revenge clip in return. After that, I read the comments from people who said I could have handled Buster's rehoming differently. Some suggestions made sense, others didn't. But at the time rehoming him felt like the only viable option and she offered no practical alternative. Buster is thriving with his new family, and I plan to visit him after the divorce. The lesson I walked away with is blunt. Be smarter with money, and don't let red flags slide because you hope they'll magically disappear. When someone responds to stress by deliberately hurting you in public, believe their capacity for chaos and don't settle for it. Ultimately, her reaction showed she wasn't right for me. That's the hard truth I carry now. I said it, and she answered with the same rehearsed lines she'd used night after night. That's not fair. Fair's for games, I shot back. We'd built a life together, a house with my hands as much as hers, and I set my duffel down on the floor to make room for the hard case that held my levels and driver set. Tools you trust the way you trust a neighbor, because a man who walks out without his tools expects to come back for them. I wasn't planning to come back. Where are you going? She asked, as if the question were logistics instead of inventory, as if she needed to tally what remained in her life. Month to month across town, I said. Deposits paid, door code set. I didn't mention I'd found the place days ago, the night the small marble in my head kept rolling until it found the edge. Her tears started then, quiet and steady, the kind that ruin mascara and strip away hope at the same pace. So that's it, she whispered. This is the cleanest thing I've done in a long time, I said. I walked to the dresser, slipped off my ring, and set it down on the wood without a speech. No flourish, no plea. She moved toward me, hand hovering near my forearm like she might grab me and drag me back into the old script. Don't do this, she begged. Please, I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean. You said them clearly, I replied, posture steady. I looked at her properly then, past the damp hair and the trembling mouth, to the place where a person decides who they will be in someone else's life. You weren't confused, I said. You were comfortable. The room narrowed to the space between us and the house held its breath. I crouched, zipped the duffel, and stood with it in my hand. Its weight was nothing compared to the loads I'd hauled for pay and pride. Before I turned for the door, I planted my feet and made sure the ground felt real. Then I said what needed saying. If respect ever comes back, it won't arrive while I'm sleeping beside contempt. She flinched as if I'd said something obscene. You're twisting everything, she snapped, voice climbing. You always do this when you don't get your way. I shrugged on a jacket, even though the night was warm. When I don't get my way, I said, I go to work. In the kitchen I flipped on the light and found a pen. A sticky note the color of caution tape sat by the calendar, and I wrote 3 lines. I'll send a list tomorrow. Utilities, mortgage, insurance. We'll split everything fairly until it's no longer ours to split. I signed my name because signatures are proof you mean it and left the note under the tiny hammer magnet she'd bought me once. Gifts are a record of who people thought you were at the time. She followed me down the hall, bare feet making no sound on the wood, tears drying in uneven tracks. You can't walk out with a note, she said, anger trying to lace over panic. I have, I answered. You preferred the smirk. I pointed at the sticky. This is the adult part. This is punishment, she said. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm leaving. Punishment is what people do when they want to stay and make you pay rent and regret. Leaving is what you do when the lease is up and the foundations are cracked. At the front closet I grabbed the spare truck keys I'd hung there out of habit, back from when we still borrowed each other's time. She brushed my hand, maybe expecting me to toss the keys back and perform a last-minute surrender. I opened the door. The warm night slid over my ankles and the grass smelled faint of water and dust. I set the duffel just outside as you stage a load before a lift so you don't trip on the threshold. She leaned against the hallway wall wrapped around herself like a borrowed coat, tears fresh and shiny. Caleb, she said softly. Please. In her eyes I saw the old map. How we met. The first trim we painted in a color we both liked. I respected that map and I also respected the sinkhole nobody had patched because patching it would have meant closing the road. You made your choice out loud, I said. I'm making mine with my feet. You won't answer my texts, she tried, a last-minute attempt at leverage. You're probably right, I said. But send them if you need to say something for yourself. I touched the door with my fingertips, not for drama but to feel the wood I'd sanded last fall. The straight grain under stain that turned out better than I expected. Then I let the door swing half closed and looked back one last time. I asked you a question, I said. Who with? Do you have someone? A tear trembled on the corner of her mouth. She opened it to speak and closed it again. Silence settled, true and heavy and clean. I nodded. That's still your answer, I said. This is mine. Morning arrived quiet as if the house were holding its breath to see if I'd flinch. I packed the last essentials into the duffel I'd staged weeks earlier. Passport, birth certificate, spare keys, the small drawer safe with my grandfather's watch, and left the master room to spend the night in the guest room because I'd meant what I said, last night under one roof. At 8 the lease for a short-term apartment went from tentative to signed. Movers were booked for the small stuff and a storage unit reserved. Before coffee I sent 3 calm, necessary messages. One to the bank to convert our joint card to cardholder only for me and freeze new charges pending council review. One to a family attorney for a consultation confirmed for Friday. And one to my boss letting him know I'd be working remotely for a few days while I relocated. File access and deliverables unchanged. Her first text came at 9:14. We need to talk. Then, you're not seriously doing this. I replied once. We started last night. I'll be civil and precise. Email only. She called anyway. I let it ring. Her voicemail slid from anger to panic in a minute and a half. It wasn't I love you. It was, don't do this to us. I made coffee and let that message sit like a museum piece. Exhibit A of what comfort looks like when it disappears. By lunchtime the practical consequences hit. A declined purchase alert pinged my phone from a boutique we both knew, and 2 minutes after that she texted, "Why is my card not working?" I typed the line I'd rehearsed for weeks. During separation shared resources become points of friction. This is not punishment. No insults. Just a boundary in a complete sentence. She answered jagged and loud, then left another tearful voicemail. I sat at the kitchen table and filled out my attorney's intake questionnaire. Each checkbox felt like a quiet step out of the fog. Around 2 the doorbell rang with that fast, repetitive press that means someone wants a scene. Opened it to find her, makeup smudged, apology already forming and failing in her eyes. She stepped in like she still owned the air. Can we please be adults? I wasn't thinking. Last night was a mistake. I let the silence breathe. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her and, paradoxically, more dangerous. Because desperation will masquerade as love if you don't watch. It's not a mistake, I said evenly. It's information. We act on information. That landed. She offered counseling. Fine, we'll do counseling, but she added, I'm not changing who I am just because you think I'm intense. There it was, bargaining with a barb. I shook my head. I'm not asking you to change. I refused to be diminished. Tears started for real then, palms raised in a surrender that was not surrender, and I stepped back and pointed to the laptop on the dining table. Anything further, put it in writing. The apartment keys were in my pocket by evening, a small rectangle of independence on a ring, and I carried 2 boxes to the trunk while a neighbor I barely knew nodded like he'd been waiting for this whole time, like the building had been listening to our quiet collapse for months. Back upstairs, she'd set a scene of dinner, wine open, candle lit, a dress bought for anniversary she later forgot. I felt nothing but the relief of a choice finally honored. You win, she said, voice shredded. There's nothing to win, I replied. She stepped closer. Kiss me then. If you still just kiss me, the old me would have buckled. The man I'd become kept his voice level. We don't fix disrespect with dopamine, I said. That line came from clarity, not spite. She followed me down the hall, pleading then angry then pleading again, everything but taking responsibility. You're throwing away years, she said. No, I answered, lifting the first box. I'm refusing to throw away more. At the doorway she tried a final, cruel card. There isn't anyone else, you know. I paused. That was your moment to say it last night. I'd asked and you'd stayed silent. I made my decision in that silence. She sank down like a wind had passed through her. At the new place I set the boxes on the floor, stood in the simple quiet. The windows were modest, the paint needed another coat, but the air wasn't negotiating with me. I made a bed with fresh sheets, unrolled a rug, put the watch in the tiny safe I'd brought, and let my phone glow with a stack of unread messages. I scrolled without opening them. Blame, bargaining, please, then a photo from an unknown number. A man with a face built for vanishing and a caption, lose my number. Maybe he'd sent it to her. Maybe she'd sent it to me by design. I didn't need that twist to justify what I'd done, but there it was. Proof that the smirk had always been built on a maybe. I walked 2 blocks to clear my head. The city looked the same with and without a ring. Traffic muttered. A dog dragged a man toward a park. Someone laughed too loudly into a phone. Normal life kept going, indifferent to personal earthquakes. I bought a cheap lamp and a better pillow, and back in the apartment, I wrote 2 emails. One to her with a bulleted list covering my move, utilities, mail forwarding, a proposed schedule to divide furniture, and my attorney's contact info. No venom, no bait, and one to my parents. I'm okay. I'll call tomorrow. Then I put my phone face down and listened to the quiet do its work. Late after midnight, a final message arrived from her. I'm scared. I stared at those 2 words, the first honest sentence she'd given me in months, and decided it deserved respect, not rescue. I typed, I know, and put the phone away because clarity isn't cruelty and boundaries aren't punishment. The tears were hers to walk through. I slept in a room I'd chosen on a bed I'd bought, with a future I wasn't outsourcing to someone else's mood. Tomorrow would be paperwork and logistics, and a consultation with an attorney who didn't care how good I used to be at apologizing. It would be coffee in a mug no one could throw away and a key that fit one lock. The first morning in the new place didn't explode with fireworks. It felt like level ground. I woke before the alarm, no weight on my chest, and made coffee in a cheap kettle. I tightened a loose screw on a cabinet hinge because it squeaked and I didn't want it to. Small fixes, no speeches. Paperwork moved faster once I decided not to use it as a weapon. My attorney was efficient. A woman with steel in her spine and mercy in her voice. We put numbers to things that had been feelings. Equity, accounts, the truck in my name, the furniture that mattered more to her than to me. I agreed to cover mortgage for 60 days, then escrow. Utilities split to month's end and then separate. Streaming, cloud storage, joint memberships closed with duplicates archived and sent. She tapped notes and nodded as I spoke. Fair needs boundaries and I kept mine. Friends did what friends do. A couple of guys reached out with bourbon and offers to haul heavy things, which is how men say we see you. One of her followers, someone who cheered her choose yourself posts, messaged me. I don't agree with how she handled you. Noted. The neighbor at the old place texted that he'd seen a man in the driveway one night. Then not again. She kept reaching, apology, anger, nostalgia, logistics dressed as intimacy. Do you remember the cabin in Gatlinburg? I found the photo from our first Christmas tree. You're really going to let lawyers decide our life? I answered only when necessary and only in writing. Dates, times, lists. The backbone you build on a job site is the same one you need when the sugar hits. Boundaries don't have to shout to hold. I changed my emergency contacts to my sister and my foreman, updated my will, moved my grandfather's watch to a black box near the door I actually use, and set a weekly training session at a gym down the block because legs remember how to carry you farther than the past. I bought a plant and watered it and in an empty room laughed out loud because I had become the sort of man who buys a plant to prove he's alive. And it worked. We met once in a public place to exchange the small things that don't fit spreadsheets. Photos, handwritten recipes, the ugly ceramic bowl from a better trip. She arrived polished. When she saw I hadn't softened, a hairline crack ran through the gloss. She tried one more version of the speech. We could try again. Counseling rules. Sleep apart and ease in. And I thanked her for the clarity and said I was done with arrangements that make men roommates. She called my resolve proud as if that were a sin. Closing accounts felt cleaner than I expected. I signed my name more times in 2 weeks than in years. The ring stayed on the old dresser. She asked if I wanted it back for closure and I said, "Closure isn't a keepsake." The final utility notice arrived and I paid it without commentary because pettiness is heavy and I don't carry what I don't need. Some night silence felt too wide, the cheap lamp casting hard edges and the rug not quite sitting flat near the corner. I thought about how we used to fit, about the sound she made falling asleep before me, about bumping into each other in the kitchen on purpose. I let the memory play and then turned it off like a show that had run too many seasons. One Saturday I drove past the old neighborhood on my way to the supply store. The lawn was trimmed, the blinds open, everything exactly fine, and I didn't slow down. At the store I bought a better level and a box of screws that won't strip because some things you improve simply by choosing better material. The decree came through faster than I'd prepared for. Signatures, stamps, dates. My attorney called. "You're done." I said, "Good," and meant it. I forwarded the final documents with a 2-sentence note. "I wish you well. Please confirm receipt." She replied, "I never wanted this," and appended a heart she probably didn't mean. Once that would have been a trapdoor. Now it was punctuation in a language I no longer spoke. Weeks later a mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd moved to a smaller place closer to her friends. "Fresh start," he said, and I asked if the store still carried the good chisels. On the way home I waited for anger or relief or grief to crest. Nothing rose. There's a word for that which isn't numb. Finished. I have no grand lesson, only a chair that doesn't wobble because I tightened it, a key that turns in one lock, and a calendar that tells the truth. Most nights I sleep before midnight and wake to an alarm. I don't snooze. Some evenings I sit on the small balcony, listen to the city, and say nothing important. That's the best conversation I've had in a long time. She still texts sometimes. Birthday notes, holiday mentions, a song she thinks I'd like. I read them all and answer none. I don't hate her. I wish her exactly what I wrote. Well, but elsewhere. Respect isn't a tactic. It's the ground everything stands on or sinks through. We ignored that until we learned it the hard way. She reached for power with a smirk and lost what mattered. I reached for a doorknob and found mine. I stopped negotiating with gravity, and when people ask how it ended, I tell them the truth in 2 clean lines. I asked a question she wouldn't answer, and I walked. Dear listeners, share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.